Awesome. Hi guys, nice to see all of you here. Nice to see Mise. Nice to see Kevin Santos. Nice to see Richard. Nice to see. Sorry. What's her name? Oh, Stacy. Nice to see you, Malcolm. And Sigu has just stepped out for a call, but he's going to be back shortly. Why am I doing what? All right, so today we're going to be talking about Rails views. It's actually a topic that Sigo had begun last time, but he did not quite finish it because he's one of many details. Kevin, would you stop talking, please? Thank you. All right, so we're going to be discussing Rails views, the basic and the common things that you need to know about Rails roots. You need to know that there's a lot more that Rails roots, sorry, why am I talking about Rails roots? That Rails views entails. So you learn about that, and I'll give you some few links that you guys can refer to, and yeah, you'll be good. All right, so this is a Ruby meetup powered by Podi, presented by the lovely Miss Getty Rao, and I'll start. Who's complaining? Who's complaining? Hey, please. Sorry? I am Getty Orao. Yes, with a W. Yeah. All this not taken. All right. Okay. Crafty says he's apologizing. He'll have to leave just before 4. Yeah. You guys should stop talking. I want to start. No. Okay. So previously on Rails views, this sounds like a movie. So we talked about convention over configuration. Convention over configuration is the type of rules that have been set forth for something to be done are being followed more than the type of settings and configurations that are to be. Can you see well? Kevo, if you can move like this, because yeah. Okay, so Richard, you're okay. You're seeing here. Well, okay. Stacy, I'm not the slightest bit worried about you. So. All right. So by default, controllers in Rails automatically render views with names that correspond to their valid roots. So if, example, I have a controller named, say, photos, and I have the roots resources named photos, and I have a view, for example, named photos.html or something, Rails will automatically tell that this view belongs to this controller because they have the same name. So that's what convention over configuration is. So before I even set it, before I even tell a controller that this is your view, it already has it as its view because the names are the same. So here's an example. This is what Sigu talked about last time. So we have a controller, books controller. This less than sign just says that it inherits from applications controller. And we have its roots, which are resources books. When I do resources books, as I talked about in Rails roots, it simply means that it contains all the roots that are linked to this books controller. So it could have the index, the show, the create, all those other resources that you guys can think of in the roots. I hope this rain isn't going to rain. Sorry, what? Yes, crude. Stacy, can you unmute yourself and tell us what crude is? I just hear her laughing. I can't hear you. Yeah. All right. She doesn't feel like talking, so clearly she doesn't know what crude is.
Yes.
So crude is create, read, update, delete. Awesome. Yeah, exactly. So those are the kind of actions that you can find in a controller. So for every action in a controller, it has to have a root. That's why we have a root linking to a certain action in a controller. And for every root in a controller, it leads to a template. Yeah. So every controller action has a template and every controller action has a root. So that's specifically how Rails works. I don't know if it's the same in Sinatra. So yeah. So we have the roots books, resources books, and we have the view file in app views books index.html. If you don't know what that is, that's just a path to where this index.html is with the content books are coming soon. So if at all I want to go to this path, the path that has index.html.erb, this is the content I'm going to see because the controller is somehow linked to the template. Rails does that for us, so we don't need to know that how it does that. So yeah. So Rails will automatically render up at that index.html when you navigate to the books path. So if I go to my local host where I've started my server and I do /books, it will automatically go to the books template because I have told it to do a controller action that is linked to that template. So it will display books are coming soon. So this specifying the second part at the bottom, it's just a continuation of what I had explained. So specifying what the index action does on the books controller yields a list of books. We know that what index is supposed to do, it's supposed to give us a list of something. So if I go to the index and I say, take this at book is, let's say, a what? It's a variable. We can call it an object. And I tell it to display all the books. We do book.all. That's a method in Ruby. It will display all the books whenever I go to this specific path /books. Yeah, that's all. So today what we're going to do in Rails is not much. We're going to do how to render, how to find layouts using redirect to, and the slight difference between render and redirect to, using only responses. Is like if you before. What does it mean? Anyone? Sorry, I can't hear you.
Rendered useless.
Sorry. Figu, you haven't answered me one bit.
I've answered you. Rendered useless.
What does rendered useless mean?
Becoming useless.
Oh God.
And Mr. said rendered speechless.
Okay. I need a good definition from a learned person at least.
Preferentially discharging.
We need to preferentially discharge this answer. Anyone? Richard, what do you understand by the term render? You can guess, you're allowed. You're allowed. You're a man. Yes, Richard? You're allowed to guess. Pass. The crafty coder. Tell us.
Rendering is making something.
Wait, what?
Making sense.
Making something.
Making something.
Making something
Yeah.
out of a sketch.
Yeah. Making something out of something. Yeah.
Wow. Mr. says making someone useless. I do not know what that means. Okay, awesome. Sigu is asking me, say, can she render lights? You guys are so distracting. So anyway, for Kevin, do you have an answer? Kevin?
Rendering to me can be like make something available.
Making something available. He's closest to the answer. So thank you, Kevin. So rendering, you could have just Googled it, by the way, you are allowed. So it's providing or giving. When I render something, I'm simply providing something. So I do not know how to explain rendering useless or rendering speechless. You
What is useless ability?
uselessability? Really? Oh my god. So you provide the ability to be useless. Wow, this is interesting. Oh yeah, that's the Poly HQ dictionary. Thank you, Stacy. So rendering a page in Rails is simply providing a different HTML page on a controller. So if I am in my controller and I'm in a certain action, say index, and I want to render probably the edit page instead. So instead of I don't know what else you can do, honestly. So I can render the edit page, and once I render the edit page, I will be displaying that page on a browser. Technically, that's what rendering is.
This other statement, this statement can also mean that rendering a page simply by providing the HTML page on the controller, a different HTML page. This means that if you're on the index page, by convention of a configuration, you're expecting to render index.
Yes.
So if you say render edit, it will not render index, it will now render edit. That's what it means by a different HTML page on the
Awesome.
controller.
Nice. So it's kind of like overriding in a way. Awesome. So render edit loads the view of the edit action and displays it on the browser. That's simply what render does for us. Okay, so this is an example of a render. So we are in the action update. It's simply a method, def update. And then this at book.find params this. What this does is that it finds a specific object of book that we're looking for in the database, and it finds it with its ID. And once it finds it, if it finds that book.update book params. So if updating is same as editing, or am I wrong? Santos? They go hand in hand. Okay. All right. So if I do the dot update on a book, I'm simply altering the details that were there for the certain book object. Yeah. And if it's updated, I'm telling it to put I am updated. And if it's not, I'm telling it to render the edit page. The edit page is which is the same page that I key in the details of everything that I want to update about that specific object. Yeah, so that's it. So render can be expressed differently. So you can render another controller's action or template. So when I want to render, I'm in a books controller, right? And I'm in my index action. But instead, I want to render the edit action of, say, person's controller. I will first specify the controller first and then the action that I want to render. So for example, we have products. Here we have a products controller and we want to render the show action of the products controller. So probably I'm in my photos controller, I want to render this. So I need to begin with the controller first and then go to the action that I want to render. It's same as using the render template really. So the second scenario is rendering, sorry.
Question on that. So are we rendering actions or we're rendering templates?
We render templates.
So this show is actually the show HTML.erb. It's
Yes.
not the show action.
Oh,
I'm asking.
yes, it is. It's the template. Sorry if I said action. It's the actions template actually.
It's the actions template. So if if there's an action product show that renders edit page,
No.
will it render the edit page or it will render the show page?
So every action has a template. And every action like show will have a template with the same name, show.html.erb.
And a slide ago, you said that if you tell index to render edit, then it will not render index, it will render edit.
Yes.
Now, if I go to books index, then I tell it to render products index. Will it render the index page of the products or it will render the edit page because our index is rendering the edit?
We are on the books controller, right? And at the index action. Then we're telling it to render the index of what? Of products. It will go to the index action of products and it will render the template of that action. which
Okay.
is index.html, but of that controller.
So basically, render products show, we are rendering the show action, not the template.
The show action template.
Are?
We are confused. You have to be clear.
Yeah, the show action.
So that's why I'm asking, if we have an action show and it's rendering index, then this means that we will ultimately render index.
Yes. Yeah.
So show in this case is a an HTML.
It's not a template, it's an action.
So it's an action that eventually have its template, but that we don't know. So we're rendering the action. The action will give us its template.
So the return value of the action is
The
the
template.
template.
Okay, second scenario, rendering a view entirely outside of your application. So maybe I'm outside of my application and I still want to render my view. So I can render that specific action or that specific view using a path or a URL that leads to that specific show action. So I can do, maybe my app is called U. Then I go to apps, warehouse app, that, until I reach my show action or my show template. And then I render it. Yeah. So we can also render plain text. So when, yeah, Kevin? Like I am on another app, right? I have my library app and I have my sample app. Then in my sample app, I want to render the view of my library app, right? So what I do is I provide for it a file path that it will go and get it from that specific app because I'm in a different app. Does that make sense, Kevin? Yes, Stacy.
Okay, so when we are rendering,
Have you unmuted?
yes, I'm unmuted. You would see. So when we like rendering an example, so it's like when we is it now when we use other apps to sign into other apps? Have they done that or
I don't think so.
other
don't think so.
people apps?
The way we use an app to log into another app, like GitLab, log in with GitHub.
Yeah, like when like the way we use Gmail, like most of our apps nowadays, like just sign up with Gmail and then like, put the Gmail user in our PPG and then after that you go back to your site.
In a way, it makes sense, but I am not sure, honestly. Crafty, you're smiling craftily. Do you have an answer?
You are logging into another app using another app. I don't think you're rendering. No, you'll render, but through the other app. It is a completely different application.
Yeah.
It's the application.
Like you're rendering a completely different app from one app. I wouldn't even call that rendering.
Directing, yeah. It will when you go to the app, it will render the page, but it's not as a result of your code. It's as a result of the other code, the Google's code, I think.
Oh my god. Okay, so I wouldn't use render in such a context, but I don't actually know what happens behind all that.
I think when you log in with Facebook, log in with Google, log in with whatever, what you actually do is when you click that button, it launches another window. Okay? This window takes you to the login page of Google, Facebook, or whatever. You log in, okay? Right?
Yeah.
Once you're done logging in, or whenever you click on that button and launch a new window, the request that goes to that new window has the callback URL. Okay? You go enter your details. After you've entered your details and everything has been authenticated, a response will be given back to your app through the callback URL. Through the callback URL back to your application, whether you successfully authenticated or not, with all the details that you allowed it to have, email or whatever it is that you allowed it to have access to. Then immediately that is done, the window is automatically closed. Yeah. So it's not really rendering on that. It's a new window, pops up, do whatever it does. Once you're done, it closes. Then I think we don't render actions, we render templates. And that's why on rendering a view entirely outside our application, you can see we are going to views. We're not going into controller. So product show is the show view of products. I think so. That's my opinion.
It makes sense. It makes sense. No, because no, honestly, it now makes sense because why would we render an action and we're talking about views? So it's kind of like a correction. All right, so rendering plain text. Thank you. Rendering plain text. When we render plain, we just render a text. Sorry, a text really. So rendering plain text. Okay. So anytime I render okay, me, I'm just thinking the browser will just show up there with the text okay. I think that is what will happen. We can render HTML strings, JSON, and XML. This is simply rendering probably a HTML code or something, right? Or a JSON object or an XML object. Correction if I am wrong. But most of the times, these are not actually used because rendering usually works with partials and with templates. So in rare cases, will you find us rendering a HTML or a JSON or an XML string back to the browser. Awesome. So point to note, render only accepts 5 options, either content type, layout, location, status, or format. So such options are the ones we've been discussing here, either HTML, JSON, or the layout or the location of where this is, like the URL. Yeah, things like that. They only have to fall under these 5 categories. It's either content type, it's either layout, it's either location, it's either status, or it's either format. So when you render something, it has to fall under these 5 categories. So all of the above mentioned fall into either of these categories, nothing else apart from this. Point to note also, make sure that you have only one call to render in a single code path. So we can't render more than once. Awesome. Then we talk about layouts. So every controller has a layout that it relates to. For instance, the photos controller uses the layout photos.html.erb. However, we can override this by specifying the layout that a given controller should use. Crafty, what are you doing? Okay, so we can always specify a layout that a controller is using. For example, this photos controller wants to use the layout images instead of using Crafty and Sigo. Concentrate. The photos controller wants to use the image layout instead of the default photos.html.erb. So doing that, you just specify the layout images instead. So the photos controller will instead use the images.html.erb as its layout. Okay. Important to note, to assign to a specific, yes, Kevin? Yeah, here or Mhm.
So if you go to this, there is usually that there will be the photos from there containing the files from each showing you. So in this case, you're telling me for this controller, the action should not use that photos folder, but instead go to the images folder.
Okay.
When you create a controller, there is usually
use, for example, users that the users folder. Inside the users folder, there will be that name and heading and stuff. If you have photos controller, there will be photos of the folder, then inside there will be files related to photos. So in this case, we are turning it for photos controller, go to this instead of, that's how I understood this.
Oh, so it goes to the folder, yeah, images.
Yeah.
All right, awesome. Thank you, Kevin. So important to note, to assign to a specific layout to all your controllers, specify the layout in the application controller. So we can specify a layout in the applications controller if we want every other controller that we're using to inherit from there. That's technically it. Then there's using redirect to. Redirect to tells the browser to send a new request for a different URL. According to how I understood this, redirect to is almost the same as rendering, but it instead sends a request to the browser, a request that it already has a response to, because when we redirect, we provide it a certain URL to redirect to, like the syntax redirect to and then the URL. So alternatively, we can use redirect back to return a user to the page that they just came from. So when we redirect back, we're redirecting to the same page that we're in. Yeah. Note that for this, we must provide a fallback location in case the browser doesn't set the HTTP referrer header that puts the location. So when we're redirecting back, the browser probably doesn't know. It's not guaranteed that the browser knows what template exactly we are in. So it's good to provide a fallback location. So for example, redirect back, and our fallback location is the root path. That if it doesn't meet the current location we're at, it'll redirect to the root path.
So does this mean that we can use redirect back in our M-Pesa case?
Yeah. To redirect back to the... This is too noisy. All right, so the rain is getting so heavy. So redirect to usually comes with a... What do I do? Can you guys hear me? All right. Can you hear me? Okay, so points to note. Redirect to usually comes with a default status code at 302. Sorry. A temporary redirect. So every time we redirect to, it comes with the status code 302, which is a temporary redirect. If you want to alter this to a permanent redirect 301, which you can do with a status option. So we can redirect to the path or the URL that we want to redirect, and then the status, we specify the specific status to redirect to, which is 301. So the simple difference between render and redirect is that render is mainly used to provide your HTML views. So anytime we render, it simply provides a HTML template or a HTML view. And anytime we redirect, it does the same by sending a request to the browser with instructions on what to do next. So the only difference between render and redirect is that redirect sends a HTTP request to the browser. Okay, and then there's using head. So what head does is send responses with headers to the browser, mostly error codes and status codes. So for example, head bad request produces the following header. So it brings us back the body of a 400 request, right? A 400 status code, which is a bad request. It has the connection, the date, the transfer encoding, the content type, runtime. All these are brought back when we use the head. So what it does, it sends responses to the header. Oh, sorry, with only headers to the browser. That's what head does. And then for yield, when we yield, we provide a layout or a yeah, a layout of our current template that we're working on. Sorry. So with the context of a layout, yield identifies a section where content from the view should be inserted. The entire content of the view currently being rendered is inserted when using the keyword yield. So can we say yield is the same as render? I don't think so. So yield identifies a section of content from the view that should be inserted. The entire content of the view currently being rendered is inserted when using the keyword yield. So when we're yielding, we're inserting the current content of the template or the view that we're working in. So for example, we have a HTML code there, and inside the body tags, we yield. So it will yield the template or the view that we're currently working on. So that's where it will insert. That's what the yield keyword does. Then partials. So a partial is a template that loads down the various things to be included. Wait, a partial is a template that loads down the various things to be included in a view template. They are another device for breaking the rendering process into manageable chunks. So when I'm feeling that my view or my template is becoming too cumbersome or is becoming too loaded, I can always break it down to small chunks called partials. And when I'm using partials, I can always render them in my view or in my templates, and it can be used as subroutines or sub tasks of a template that I'm using. So when I'm using a template and I divide it into specific partials, I don't have to include those lines of code in that specific template. I can include them or I can write them in a partial outside of that template and then render those partials instead. So we render partials the same way we use the render method. So we render and then the partial name. So one way to use partials is to treat them as the equivalent of subroutines, as a way to move details out of a view so that you can grasp what's going on more easily. So I think partials make our works easier, because when I'm using partials, I can always refer to a partial and know that this partial does this specific thing and this partial does this, and I can always add them up to my layout or to my templates and make more sense of it. Yeah, that's it for Rails views. Anyone who has a question can ask. We are not in a position to ask questions. So thank you guys. I will see you in the next meetup. Bye.